Good evening and welcome to Wakefield's third annual Tri-Board meeting. I hereby call this meeting to order. Over the years, Wakefield has strived to create and improve upon maintaining best practices in its financial management. These practices include the utilization of long-term forecasting models and have resulted in a AAA bond rating, which has saved the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars on interest on the bonds necessary to fund schools or road repavings and other capital projects. The Tri-Board meeting is an opportunity for us as a community to see how the town council, the school committee, and the finance committee work together to deliver the best balanced services to all citizens of Wakefield. We hope that you enjoy tonight's presentations, and we will welcome your questions at the end. It is my pleasure to introduce the chair of the school committee, Susie Bayer, for some opening remarks.
Thanks, Julie. Good evening. Wakefield school administrators and staff have been working hard over the past few months to create as much of a normal learning environment as possible for all of our Wakefield students. But the reality is that things are not even close to being back to normal. Our students have lost more than 18 months of normal learning and social interactions, and they are struggling on many fronts. Our teachers and staff have worked tirelessly to teach our students using many different methods. They have had to learn new ways to teach and connect with our students. Students and teachers are thrilled to be back in the classroom, even with all the various mitigation strategies that are in place. But this excitement does not negate the fact that there are still many challenges. But along with the challenges come a number of wins to celebrate. This committee is incredibly proud of all that has been done by our administrative staff over the past 18 months. They have risen to every challenge that has come our way. They have secured grants from the state for acceleration academies and have implemented the test and stay program as well as the symptomatic testing program. They hired additional teachers and nurses to support COVID needs across all of our schools. They have responsibly spent or planned for our ESSER 1 and 2 and 3 grant funds coming from the state, with a focus on improving the safety of our facilities, supporting student social emotional learning needs, and increasing staff to address the rise in special education testing requirements. Teacher leaders completed a math curriculum evaluation last spring and are rolling out the new innovative curriculum this fall. Food services fed kids and families many, many meals. They are balancing new challenges with the supply chain, while many more kids take advantage of free lunches for all. Administration has worked with Town Hall to fund one-year positions that ensure that our students in quarantine are supported in their academics. They are collaborating with Town Hall on remaining needs of students and staff when thinking about the federal funds that are coming to Wakefield. They're working with the MSBA and various partners to move Wakefield along the process toward a new high school in the next few years. I could honestly go on and on about the amazing work that is happening in our district. Our administrators and staff are working so very hard on behalf of students and families of Wakefield Public Schools. We should be incredibly proud of all that Wakefield has accomplished during this difficult time. Superintendent Lyons will provide additional details about our current financial situation and how we're thinking about our future financial needs when he presents a little bit later on. Thank you. Now I will hand this over to Jim Sullivan from the Finance Committee.
Good evening, thank you. And we've got a series of slides to kind of review where we are financially, finishing up this year and looking ahead. Dan Sherman will help with those slides, and Steve, myself, will speak about where we are. We are in a better position than we thought we might be from the end of our planning purposes to kind of where we are now and leading into this year. So we'll get into that and some of the details on the slide deck as we move it along. Appreciate it. And welcome to the rest of the Finance Committee and others that are in attendance.
And before we do go to that, and you can probably put the slideshow up right now while you're doing that. If any of the attendees of any of the boards would like to speak or have a question, you can put any questions in the question and answer if you wish, or, and for the public too that may chime in and want to look at this, or if you raise your hand, you'll be recognized and can speak. It's just too many people to put on the screen at the same time. So I note that a lot of members of most boards are here. I do see that Ann Santos, Ann Danahy, Ed Dombrowski, and Maureen Butt are here on the town council. So with that, if you would put the slides up, WCAT, we can take it from there. And I think Dan Sherman's going to lead us off.
Okay, next slide, please. So, good evening, everybody. Good to be here talking about our financial situation. So, on this slide, those of you who attend town meeting, these will look very familiar. I've added another year for fiscal year 21. So, we're looking to the year just ended on the first set of 6 slides. Local receipts are much better than expected. We were expecting a decrease of probably over $1 million, $1.5 million, depending upon who you're talking to, because of the pandemic. But you'll notice that 2020 was down a bit as expected, but we had a nice rebound in fiscal year 21. So the entire year of the pandemic, we actually saw an increase over 2020, led by motor vehicle excise taxes, which of course is our biggest revenue generator. But other areas as well responded. The hotels didn't do quite as well as expected, but restaurants did better than expected. So those special assessments and so forth actually did quite well. So anyway, pretty good news there for fiscal year 21. We're expecting a big drop. Next slide, please. On this slide, we show the state aid. And again, state aid had an increase over the prior year, about what we expected. We were hoping for more, but you can see that we've got to the point where we're still a little bit less than we were way back in 2001, but we're getting closer to that point. If you adjust for inflation, we're quite a ways behind, but at least it's going in the right direction. Next slide, please. On the stabilization fund, this shows both the balance. We're just over $3 million, and as a percentage of budget, it's just over 3%. This is a spot that we're planning on putting some more funds going forward, and hopefully that'll help us out in case we have unforeseen circumstances. We'd like to build the stabilization fund up a little bit. It's making progress. We got a ways to go. Next slide, please. So free cash came in quite a bit higher than expected for a number of reasons, and some of those Steve will get into a little bit later. We're expecting a significant reduction in free cash, somewhere around the $6 million range. We actually ended up around $8 million. So a very pleasant surprise there, and we'll be using some of that this fall. We have a few articles that will spend a bit of that free cash. Next slide, please. The debt service fund, we managed to creep it up a little bit, just over $400,000. We'd like to get that a little bit higher, but as you know, as we pay off different projects and the debt fund looks like it's going to go up, we end up spending some money, for example, on roads and some of the buildings, and we'll be spending some more on the public safety building and other projects as they come up. So it'd be nice to get that a little bit larger, but it's okay. Next slide. So on capital, what we're showing here is the capital both in dollars and as a percentage of as a percentage of our budget. You can see that we had a big drop, as everybody's aware. We decreased the capital budget for 22, for our 21 and 22 down to $1 million because of the pandemic. I think we're in a position now we're going to push it back up. So that will be a nice rebound, but capital is a spot that we felt we could delay some of our spending because of the pandemic. Then we'll be moving back up again.
Right. And if I can jump in, Dan, we actually did move that back up in May of 2021. So that this fiscal year we're in now, we're back up to 2 million.
Yeah, we're back up now. Right. Thank you. So I think that is what I intended to cover at the beginning of this presentation. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over, I believe, Steve?
This is Jim. Jim Sullivan.
Back to Jim.
Yep.
Thank you. Next slide. Excuse me. So as far as the budget process goes, the finance committee and other departments and boards in town, there are meetings that take place in the fall, Steve, with department heads and with school committee and the departments this year, as it states, we're encouraging level funding for all but contractual items, trying to have new projects linked to the budget priorities. And when it comes to the budgets, both at the department level and then when some of the subcommittees within the finance committee, every line item is kind of reviewed and discussed. Steve does that with his department heads, schools with the school committee and staff. Presentations are then made to the town council and the finance committee in the January timeframe. We start reviewing department by department, and then the presentation to the town prior to the Springtown meeting, and then at the town meeting itself, where we as the finance committee review and try to understand the budgets, and we give our opinion on the budgets during the town meetings, and that's part of our process and what we follow through the charter and the intent of trying to help the town know that we're also reviewing budgets and presenting at town meeting and giving our opinions thereof. Next slide, please. So relative to the cycle for the fiscal year in mid-September, you can see there's some planning and forecasting. The subcommittee of the finance committee, the forecasting subcommittee, did meet, and Dan chairs that, and through Steve and his team, review receipts that have come in, review how the town departments close budgets, if there's any funds returned or any other activity that might need to be attended to. Late September, around this time, there was a kickoff meeting with the finance committee, which we'll actually be holding next week. And we lead into the tri-board meeting, which is tonight, which is a chance for us to all review and understand receipts and how we stand year over year to try to set a stage and give some overview and guidance to all involved. And then October through November, the department heads, school level and department town level, begin starting to look forward and collecting priorities and starting to form a framework for their budgets. Into the January through April timeframe, the budgets are being worked on and finalized. Subcommittees from the finance committee work with department heads. There'll be several meetings usually taking place through a number of subcommittees for all the department heads, and again through schools as well. And in the end, there are budgets that are then approved by town council, looked at, approved by town council, and by us as a FinCom body, and through the school department and school committee, and then so on through to the town meeting. That's kind of the framework overview, end to end on the process. Next slide. For the Steve, do you want to cover the COVID stuff?
Yep, I will. So this is I think this was our second COVID budget year, the first being, fiscal year 21. And, we really had a little bit more data to work with this year. We didn't know anything going into our first COVID budget. We kind of planned for the worst and hoped for some better results, which we received, and we'll be covering those later. So when going into last fiscal year, I talked about how we did increase capital. We went back to the $2 million a year that we'd like to do. That still leaves $1 million in capital that we need to make up because we didn't get that. So we'll have to plan on that in future years. But we did increase our revenue projection based upon our experience. And I'll go into that a little bit later, but we did, as Mr. Sherman discussed in the beginning, we did cut our projected revenue for other than taxes, real estate taxes, based on the fact that we knew we weren't going to get as much meals tax or hotel taxes, or were people going to pull building permits. We didn't know what was going to happen. So we ratcheted that down for last fiscal year. We put it up for the fiscal year we're in now. We moved up at about 10%, and we're very cognizant of we can't have too much increase in revenue when we go to the DOR, Department of Revenue, and set our tax rate. So although when we go through these slides, you're going to see that there's probably more revenue come in than we're projecting to set our tax rate, A lot of that has to do with what the DOR will do. We also looked at expanding some programs. We expanded, there's learning loss issues that we had to tackle at the schools. We're tackling them. We certainly felt that we had some social and mental health issues that we needed to tackle. We increased hours of our clinician and things like that. We're also very concerned with positioning ourselves for the long term. Like I said, we increased capital expenditures. And one thing we really want to do is prudently maintain reserves. We do have a policy on that. And I will tell you, as someone who has been on surveillance calls with Wall Street, they love our policies, particularly with reserves, and they love the fact that we pretty much adhere to them. So that's really important. And as we will suggest in November, on November 6th, I believe, we will use some of our free cash to balance the budget. But we'll talk about that a little later and show you how that all comes back to fruition. Next slide, please. So we talked a lot last year, and we settled on, or I settled on, I should say, after long discussions with the Finance Committee, what form was the recovery going to take? And people thought it might be a V, like we went straight down and go straight up. I think we settled on more of a gradual incline. And I think that actually it's probably for Wakefield a little bit steeper incline going up because of, I think, really the resiliency of the Wakefield people and how they responded to our businesses. So let's go and see where we are. Next slide, please. So for this fiscal year that we're in right now, real estate taxes, 79.3 million. That's a known number. We know what we had for taxes last year. We know what 2.5 of that amount is. So that's the really known number that we know. Now, whether we collect that is another issue, but we do know that that's solid, and we've had a very, 98, 99% tax collection rate. So that's been great over the years. Local receipts. When I talk with and do the forecasting with the FinCom forecasting committee, Kevin and I are usually much more conservative on that number, and that's 6.875 million, which is meals tax, hotel taxes, excise taxes, building permit fees, things like that. Last year probably came in closer to 8 million. However, like I stated before, if we went out to the Department of Revenue with a big increase of 1.2 million in that line item, I think we would DOR would raise some eyebrows. So what we do is we balance it with free cash, knowing that this will supplement come a little bit higher. Municipal Gas and Light Department payment in lieu of taxes, $932,000. That's by agreement. We know that that's correct, and so that'll be there. State aid of roughly $11 million. Would love that to be higher, but unfortunately it isn't. And $11 million in 2021 versus $11 million in 2008. I'd rather take that 11 million in 2008. It went a lot farther. New growth. This was actually a pleasant surprise. New growth, and you can see what's going around in Wakefield. 1.7 million is a very healthy number, and we expect some healthy numbers there going forward. Available funds, those are some other fees, wetland filing fees, things like that, 248,000. So we're basically looking at $100 million enterprise at the end of the year. And that's our revenue side. And we feel pretty good about that going into this fiscal year. Continue to the next slide, please. So let's talk about, we have some results. It's really nice and easy to forecast, but let's see where we went. Fiscal year 21, we anticipate, I'm going back a year, 6.25 million in local receipts. That was really based on a dire circumstances under COVID-19. Remember what it was in March of 2020 when we were setting that budget and looking at that number? There was a complete shutdown of a lot of businesses. We didn't know what was going to happen. Actual local receipts came in at 7.8 million, which was quite a pleasant surprise to all of us. So I call that the Wakefield positive factor of 1.55 million. And so that's something that really helped us out. Next slide, please. Other aid that we're receiving is unrestricted local aid from the governor's budget, 3.7 million. Chapter 70, 6.85 million. Charter school reimbursement from the governor's budget, 258,000. Of course, we pay out more on the other end. And there are some other areas, veterans, reimbursements, things like that, which brings up us to about that $11 million from the state. Next slide, please. As I always say, the state, you need to look at page 1 of their revenue sheet, which gives you the revenue, and page 2, which is where they take money away. The MBTA, $612,000 that the town is charged to have the MBTA go through. Charter school tuition, 1.2 million. This one is a tough one, and we talk about that every year. And it is hard to quantify, but that is the number that we get. There's some other areas of the governor's budget of $120,000, directed fees like library fees, things like that we get. But the total governor's budget takeaway was 1.7 million. And next slide, please. And I'm saying governor's budget because although, there's a revenue consensus, still hasn't been a real final vote on this. And I think we're at the floor at the state. This can only go up. They have a $5 billion surplus because they exceeded revenues as well last year. So let's see what happens. But there is still some budget uncertainty until it is finalized. Section 9C cuts. So those are cuts that the governor can make or the legislature can make if things get dire. It has happened to us before. It happened a number of years ago. I think it was in 2008, 2009, where, they'll say, town of Wakefield, we know that you counted on, very simple math, $1 million worth of state aid. We promised that to you in the beginning of the year. And geez, that doesn't look like it's going to work out. So we're going to reduce that 1 million to 750,000. Well, problem with that is that A, you lose the $250,000 of aid. And by the time they tell you the year is half over, so you only have half the year to make that up. I don't think we're going to see any 9C cuts this year, but it's always something that's embedded in the back of my mind. Stay there. So anyways, some of the other items we looked at, and we ran a report year to date that we're in now through September 30th. And, there are 4 major items that bring in money to the town other than taxes. Local option meals tax, $98,000. Pretty good for the period of July 1st, 2021 through September 30th, 2021. I will tell you, last year, in 2020, same time frame, that was $69,000. So that's an increase about 50% there. People are going to our local restaurants. People don't want to drive into town, take the subway into Boston, what have you. And I think the outdoor dining that the town council has promoted, if you go around to those places, very busy and has done really well. And I think the proof is in the meals tax there for us. Hotel tax, $98,000 this year from July 1st through September 30th. They both were right around 98. They weren't exactly the same. Last year, that number was 0 at that time. Think about that in 2020. People were not staying anywhere. We did get some money in October of 2020, but for the first quarter, we got nothing. So that's a big jump from last year. Excise tax, and that's paid on cars. That is about exactly the same as last year for that time period. And this is one of the smaller excise tax commitments that we do. I'm seeing that, there are a number of people that are buying new cars. New cars are hard to get. So excise tax, we're going to see where that goes in the next few years. Building permits for the first through 9/30 of this fiscal year, the first quarter, $173,000. Great number there. Last year, it was $98,000. So that's been a pretty good indication that there's a lot of building going on. You see it in the bigger projects, but a lot of people are doing home improvements, and that number is made up of a lot of people putting on additions, new bathrooms, things like that. So that's not just big projects down there. So I think the numbers came in good last year, but there was something else that helped us out through the through the pandemic, and that was the CARES Act. And that really helped supplement a lot of the items we needed to do, whether in our schools or other areas. And if we can go to the next slide, I thought that maybe the public would like to know a little bit about what happened under the CARES Act. So the CARES Act was what came out of federal government, and the town was allotted $2.4 million. And we needed to apply for approval of all these expenses before we were reimbursed. So, we would work with the state, with the Department of Revenue, audit and finance there, and they would say to us, we'd like to do X. And they'd say, okay, that fits the criteria, do it, and we'll pay you back. And so it's kind of, I call it a force account. So we're forced to spend the money first before we get reimbursed. But we cleared everything with them ahead of time. And even after that, when they went back and did the audit, they questioned some things that they had cleared before. So it's a good thing that we take copious notes and have everything in writing. So a lot of school-related expenditures. I'm sure that the superintendent will talk about that a little later on when we get to his section. But that's what we spent out of the CARES Act. And that could have been anything from sanitizing and cleaning to abilities to do remote learning and things like that. And salaries for teachers and extra things that happen there for remote learning. Capital expenditures. I'll tell you that we spent $267,000 on HVAC systems there, including a new unit at the Dahlberg School that we would have had to have done anyway. But under the CARES Act, or had to have done eventually under the CARES Act, certainly clean air was an important issue to getting the kids back in school at the end of that time when they did come back in. So that was kind of something nice to use under the CARES Act. So that was about $270,000 there. Generator at Town Hall was $55,000. We needed that for a long time. It was great to have that. Testing and social distance measures. We did a lot of testing for the public. We spent a lot on masks. We did the mask giveaway to the whole entire public. We put social distance barriers in schools and other town buildings. That was a big amount there, and well worth it. I think it kept our community very much safer. Overtime and salaries, and that was particularly in the area of our public safety personnel. And we had, our public safety personnel never left the job. They continued working all the way through, and unfortunately, a number of them did get ill, needed to be replaced, and which means that we have to have full shifts with police and fire. They had a lot more calls. We actually had an extra firefighter on one of the apparatus because to keep them safer, which led to more overtime. It also cost of quarantining our first responders when they did get ill to make sure their families were safe. And that was all put under the CARES Act. There might be in there some salaries, percentages of other employees that were salary based, putting a percentage of their salaries that was spent on COVID. And you could put 100% on a lot of us during that time. And some other miscellaneous items added up. So that adds about 2.4 million. That money there helped us get through the pandemic and provide services to the community not only in the areas of education, but everything else, and also help protect the community. Think about the huge vaccination clinics that we had. We did 1,464 doses in one day, which I don't know if Fenway Park hit that amount. They were thrilled when they did 500. That cost money to put that together. So a lot of that came in there. So I think we used the CARES Act very prudently, and all of those were approved and reapproved by the state. So I have no fear of anything, of any issue there. Next, we're going to turn over to the schools in some of their challenges going forward. So the next few slides will be Doug Lyons. So you can turn the page, please.
Thank you very much, Steve. I have about the next 7 or 8 slides. I'm going to give a quick update in terms of where we are in FY22, what some of our challenges will be as we're looking ahead to FY23 and beyond. I just, before I get started on my slides, I just like to say that the strength of our work and the ability to kind of stretch our dollars is really dependent upon the relationships that we have in the municipality. Steve's comments about the CARES Act and how we stretch that money, it kind of, I think he's understating the work that was done there. We creatively moved some capital projects onto that list. We went after every dollar that we could through the federal government and through reimbursements to be as aggressive as we possibly could to offset costs. But all of that really has to do with personnel and our ability to work together to go after those dollars. So it's much appreciated and recognized on the school side. So in terms of the Wakefield Public Schools for our FY22 budget, in town meeting, the town appropriated $45,343,200. That is a budget that supports close to 600 employees in 7 bargaining units that are working to teach and support close to 3,500 students in 6 school buildings, as well as post-academy. So when the budget was approved, it was reduced by an amount of $360,000 because that's the amount of money that we had anticipated would be COVID-related costs. And so Steve and FinCom thoughtfully suggested that if we kind of set aside these COVID-related costs, that we might be able to recapture those dollars through other sources, which would reduce the kind of the local budget, which I think was a pretty shrewd move. And that came back to us and when our grants came in. I can talk more about that in our next slides. So next slide, please. So COVID-19 related costs in FY22, personal protective equipment and facilities, $45,000. Budget maintenance and supplies, $153,090. What's important to note, and Steve spoke to this earlier, is that the need for us to really evaluate and look at our HVAC in all of our buildings and kind of not only the kind of the changes that need to occur with those systems in regard to filters and filtration, but additional preventative maintenance costs and repairs, that was all accelerated through COVID, right? And so, which is why this number is as high as it is. And as we're moving forward, we're anticipating that $153,000 in FY22 will need to be spent to balance systems at all buildings. That includes new filters at a higher rating to best filter the air, as well as to provide air purifiers. And we've also needed to kind of rent storage containers. Next slide, please. So COVID-related costs, when we talk about learning loss and how we might address learning loss, we know that the most significant way to increase support due to COVID-related kind of concerns and it relates to direct service in the classroom and personnel. And so I mentioned earlier that kind of the COVID-related costs, I'd shared that we had set aside, we had 10 COVID-related positions at a cost of $360,000. That number has grown from 360 to 480. That has included 2 new custodians, 2 new nurses to support testing that's happening. We have new testing programs that Susie Veyer mentioned at the beginning of our slides in our presentation. That also has included 4 new teachers to support students that are unable to come to school due to COVID-related issues, whether they are COVID positive and they need to be in isolation, or if they're in quarantine. So these teachers, it's broken out. We have 2 at elementary, 1 at middle, and 1 at high. And what they do is they support classroom teachers to ensure that students are getting work, getting it completed, and getting it back, so teachers can give feedback on the work completed. We've also needed to hire 4.5 FTE, and we're funding those positions through our ESSER 2 grant. That's 1 adjustment counselor at the high school, 1 adjustment counselor at the middle school, school psychologist at the middle and high for testing, as well as a 0.5 language-based special education teacher at the middle school. Now, these positions in the middle of this slide down, the 4.5 FTE, those are funded through ESSER 2, our ESSER 2 grant. And the top positions were the COVID-related positions that I alluded to when I started off, when we said that there would be an offset of 360, and we would recapture that through our grants. So that's something that we're working with. We'll work with Steve and FinCom on, and how kind of that will come back. Likely that will come back through the American Recovery Plan and ESSER as well. So we're also resourcing technology at $90,000 that has included kind of the expansion of Zoom, Chromebooks, as well as hotspots for students that need assistance and support with wireless access to complete assignments. Next slide, please. So in regard to COVID-19 related grants and gifts, I think we've been particularly aggressive going after state and federal money to support students. The ESSER grant is part of ARP. ESSER is the education side of ARP. So the ESSER 1 grant, which was provided in FY21, has been expended. The ESSER 2 grant, which is $376,000 for FY22, we are quickly on the way to expending that grant. And the ESSER 3 grant, we've just made application for, and this is a 3-year grant. So it's not different in regard to its allocation to ARP that has come in on the town side. We've also applied for and received an acceleration grant to support students to come back to school early in August for the amount of $90,000. And what we were able to do is create acceleration academies where our kindergarten students that were not in school last year, that were welcoming new to the Wakefield Public Schools, we were able to welcome them back with their kindergarten teachers and come in small groups for half of the day and experience what a school day is like, meet some of their kind of fellow students that would be joining them in their new classes. But that was really a tremendous, tremendous success. I need to thank Kara Morrow for facilitation of that, as well as Lindsay Mosca and Val Drynan for their work in that area as well. Community gifts. Community gifts have been really a remarkable space for us. We've received donations, private donations, in the amount of $183,250. This is from the Trachtenberg Family Foundation, and they have graciously donated this amount of money, which has supported tutoring for, actually it started in FY21 and it's come over to 22. So we can break that out more specifically for FY21 and 22. But that has continued to provide support in tutoring and academic support, as well as nutrition services and food service, and technology for students, especially students that have needed Chromebooks last year that were unable to get into school. So that donation was really remarkable in helping us provide supports for students and families. We've also received $21,000 in grants to support our athletic programs, which we're particularly pleased about. Next slide, please. When we think about new costs, I've already kind of covered our FTEs, but when we think about new costs in FY22, new costs continue to be, and I can't stress this enough, that with changes in COVID, some changes are here to stay, right? Like Zoom is here to stay. We're meeting this evening on Zoom. Zoom is something that we feel like is going to be an ongoing cost year over year. What is also going to be an ongoing cost year over year is increased costs for preventative maintenance in regard to higher and to more efficient and higher rated filtration systems in schools, as well as the ongoing costs for PPE, masks, hand sanitizers, as well as cleaning costs. Next slide, please. So we currently have 11 storage containers, which we have returned some of our containers, but some of our containers we're still using. The reason that we have containers is predominantly for furniture, where we've had to get things out of school to create space for social distancing as a safety mitigation strategy. We're also collaborating on extraordinary maintenance along with the DPW, and there are additional funds that we are going to need to be allocated in that space. But the good news is that we're working very closely with DPW and Joe Conway, and we feel like with the funds that we currently have in FY22, that we're going to be able to meet those costs. Next slide, please. So when we start doing work in forecasting for our budget, we talk about what are knowns and what are unknowns. So what are knowns for us is that there's going to be an increase in special education needs. There's going to be an increase in special education evaluations, as well as additional support in regard to FTEs and teachers that we're going to need help with in terms of our nursing staff, our service providers that include special education services, and our ongoing facilities costs, which I've covered in earlier slides. Unknowns, which we need to kind of work through in our forecasting and budgeting process, are what the actual costs and needs, student needs are in regard to counseling and social emotional learning needs due to COVID, what special education costs are, and what are out-of-district placements, what do they look like? You know, several out-of-district schools that we have sent students to that have needed to leave the district in the past are no longer accepting students because they're so crowded and demand is so high due to COVID. You know, a lot of out-of-district placements are just overrun. They just cannot take any new enrollments. So these are things that we're going to need to be thinking about in terms of how we might create programming in district, or how we might be able to collaborate with other districts to support students. So obviously there's a question around COVID-related costs as we move forward. This year in FY23 in our preparation, we are going to be negotiating for 6 of our bargaining units. And this is a particular area that we need to pay attention to because in kind of our 6 bargaining units that we're going to be negotiating, it includes some of our lowest wage earners that we really need to pay attention to in regard to being able, not only as a municipality, but a school system. You'll see across the state and across the country how difficult it is to fill positions now. There are shortages everywhere. We are trying to recruit staff, and we are short-staffed in our food service area, in our bus area, and transportation. So it's hard to recruit and maintain and kind of develop personnel when the wages in those for our lowest wage earners are in such a state. And so we really need to work, and we'll need to collaborate with FinCom and the town on that to really think about how we might do that, not in one budget cycle certainly, but how we might address that over the next several years. And we're also kind of interested in how state support is going to shake out. And so right now we feel positive that we've been able to get the grant funding that we have gotten from the state. But the question is, will that continue? Next slide, please. So when we think about FY23 and beyond, the beyond for us means FY24, FY25. We always talk about creating sustainable programming and sustainable budgets year over year. When Steve talks about reserves, he talks from a position of experience where he knows what it has been like when we've needed to dip into those reserves or we've been short, and that has affected our bond rating. So we think in the same way around our schools and budgeting kind of long term. So we are kind of challenges for us and questions, our safety and COVID and those related costs, addressing achievement, equity, and opportunity gaps. We're seeing a pronounced gap that has really presented itself in regard to different socioeconomic kind of standings and families in our district. The question is, well, how might we respond to that? Human resources, I mentioned this a moment ago, retaining, recruiting, and developing outstanding teachers, administrators, paraeducators, and what we should add there is all members in all of our bargaining units, right? This is going to be something that's going to be vital and a challenge for all of us as we move forward. In terms of developing a facilities master plan, we feel like that's critical because we know, and we've been working, we've met all of our benchmarks with the MSBA for a new high school. We're working with our project management group from left field and our new architectural firm, SMMA. We're in a kind of the educational visioning phase to start to think about what we're going to need within a new high school. So that's a focus. I know the safety building is, when we think about a municipality and we think about how the schools complement the town, but we also know we don't want to kind of steal the thunder of things that are happening currently. The safety building is a big deal for us in the town right now. But looking ahead, we know that after the high school is built, we're likely to break ground with the new high school in 2025. But after the new high school is built, we are going to need to be thinking about how we might renovate and add on to the Greenwood School with a particular attention to developments in town and new enrollment. Next slide, please. Additional challenges are really just looking at the needs of special education students as well as English language learners. We often kind of gloss over the needs of other subgroups when we talk so much about special education. But the number of students that are moving into the district whose first language is not English is increasing year over year. And when they come to our schools, we need to support them so that they can learn in English. That requires a modified curriculum and a modified schedule. That is not something that's negotiable. That is a mandate of the state. And so but that also has kind of a commitment of resources that we need to be thoughtful about how we might support that. We are looking very closely with the high school administration around early college opportunities and internship opportunities for our high school students. We feel like these are things that are emerging needs that will set our high school students apart. If the Commissioner of Education has just come out and said that these are priorities as well. So we're pleased to be a little bit ahead of the state, and we know that Amy McLeod and her team certainly have wanted to do this work for some time. So we have included STEAM, science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math, as well as computer science as a focal area that we need to attend to, because we know that there are shortages in the workplace for these particular needs. So we need to think about how we might provide experiences for students to get those needs that might lead to college majors or courses that they might take in college that might help students get and kind of get a job that is going to set them apart for their peers. So acceleration academies, I mentioned a moment ago, it's hard to think that we have created such a successful program this summer. And I think that the expectation is that we will continue that in oncoming years or in incoming years. The need for extended day and intervention services is significant. Health and safety environments in our schools, as well as counseling and student support services, are really an emerging area that we're really starting to scratch the surface on. The good news is that I know that Steve is working with Catherine Dingra as well, and we are as well with our new Director of Board of Health to think about how we might address some of these needs as a community in regard to kind of public health. So that's a positive. Next slide, please. So that's it from my remarks. At this point, I can turn it back over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Doug. And I know we've thrown a lot of numbers at you, and I know that the FinCom loves it. I love it. Some members of the town council who were former FinCom members, they love it too. but but what does it all mean? What are we doing? We're really looking what's going to happen in the future years. And I still say that what we do really depends on the shape of the rebound. We talked about that Nike swoosh. Um, is it a little bit steeper? I think it is a little bit steeper. So I might even upgrade some of these just based on what's happening since we put this together. But I think we are considering that state aid will increase at a steady 4% a year. I would love it to be more, but I'm certainly not going to, bet the farm on it going forward. Local receipts rebounded, we rebounded in our minds 10% in fiscal year 22. I can see that going again, and I can see us almost getting up to, in our forecasting, back to some pre-pandemic levels and then steadily increasing it after that as we go forward. New growth will continue at 4%. The only caveat there is that none of the new growth so far includes the 345 kV power line. And that's because it's not active yet. I mean, that was slowed down from COVID as well. So when that line gets active, we are counting on a big bump in new growth. And really, that's something that is an inconvenient and horrible as it is right now to put up with. Really isn't going to put much of a tax on on all of our products out there. We're not going to, they're not sending, the power line is not sending kids to schools or kids to the health department or what have you. So it is going to, it should be some good money coming in. We did return to 2 million in capital. We'd like to increase that as we go forward. I think we have to be honest and say that we're going to see 3 to 4% increases overall in budgets, particularly with some of the new COVID items that we're going to have to put in there and to continue. Reserves could diminish a little bit over the next few years, but I don't think that's even going to happen anymore. But I think Dan Sherman will show you what we're forecasting going forward. I talked about the COVID new normal costs, and we will continue to look for every federal/state fund to help balance the budget and to do projects as we go forward. So next slide, please. And I think we're going to turn back over to Dan, who's going to talk about where he thinks we are.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so looking forward, based on the assumptions that Steve had just outlined, one of the things you'll notice in this particular slide is in 2023 is a big switch from 22 to 23, going from a deficit position to a surplus. And that's driven by that power line. You'll see in the increase in income, a 5.72% bump there. And that's really driven by the power line. So that's really going to, and then of course, once that's in, that carries forward into the future. It's not like it's going to be there, then disappear. It'll continue to generate tax revenue for us going forward. So when I was looking at this, forecast last spring, I had deficits for like 4 or 5 years, and then finally things started to turn around and started looking much better. But because of 21 and the increase in revenue, the fact that we have been able to get all the aid from the feds and from the state, our local receipts were much higher than expected. And now, Victor came through with a $1.7, $1.8 million in new growth. This particular chart went from something that looked pretty ugly to something that looked pretty nice. It really does look like things have turned around. We're all feeling much better about our near-term and long-term future. Next slide, please. So looking at our reserves, right now we have about 6 million in free cash, which is, and we're going to spend some of that, and is actually it's closer to 8 million when we get all said and done. And what we're doing is expecting that to decrease for some period of years and then start turning around and going up. That's what we're looking at, and we'll see how that works out. But we will have to spend some more money. For example, one of the things that's in my forecast is the cost of the vocational technical school and their new building. We're going to be hit with several $100,000 of additional cost from the VOC because of that building. And we'll be spending some of that free cash in other areas as well. But all in all, not too bad. It is, again, this looked much worse last May. And one of the things we're going to try to do is start pushing some more money into the stabilization account. You can see we're going to push that up and try to get it, a higher percentage of our total budget. For those that recall, we try to keep a 10% reserve, 10% of our total spend, which is roughly $10 million. We have in reserves of free cash, a stabilization on a combined basis. So we need to increase stabilization to maintain that 10% policy. So that's what we're looking at going forward. And at this point, I think, Steve, you're going to take over on the ARPA?
Yes, yes. So I think another real opportunity we have is the American Rescue Plan Act. And this is the additional money to help not only to fight the ongoing effects of COVID, but really to try to position communities into the future. And this is handled a little bit differently than the CARES Act was. The CARES Act was really all hands on deck to really kind of cover exactly what was going on in the moment. I think ARPA is really looking forward in what can we do to make the community better, to make programs better, to help citizens, whether they be nonprofits, businesses, or individuals. So this was signed into law in March 11, 2021, and it can be used for expenses from March 3rd, 2021 forward. So there's no going back with ARPA to get previous, put things that you spent back prior to March 3rd. So, which is good because we didn't really need to do that anyway. Costs must be incurred or obligated by December 31st, 2024. So we have 3 years to carefully think how we're gonna use this money, and something that the town council has discussed, and I'm sure the school committee has discussed, and we are going to be really opening that up to the community to get some community input to see what do we want to do, what we want to make Wakefield look like, and how do we want to handle this money. Handled a little differently from our end than the CARES Act was. I remember I said the CARES Act, we had to spend the money and then go forward and get approval, spend the money, and then get reimbursed. This is done a little bit differently, and the funds are received directly from the U.S. Treasury. And I put a little asterisk there because they still went through the state. We didn't get anything from the U.S. Treasury directly. It still went through the state. And Wakefield's share is based upon, really based on a per capita basis and based upon two factors. And next slide, please. So Wakefield's share of this is a little over $8 million. And 5.2 of that is what's called the county share. And remember, the ARPA funds is a national program, and across the country, many areas, there is a big county government. So you won't see you wouldn't see a Wakefield Fire Department. You wouldn't see a Wakefield Police Department. You might see a Middlesex County Fire Department, Middlesex County Police Department. So in active county governments, the county got some money directly under the ARPA program. Because Middlesex County is not an active county government, Wakefield's share of that was $5.2 million. And the other share was based on our per capita was $2.8 million. So that's a little bit over $8 million. Now you note, I mentioned it and Superintendent Lyons mentioned it, is that we actually obviously knew this was coming by the time we got to town meeting. So we actually put some expenditures into that amount to because again, we were worried about, the tax levy. So probably $400,000 or $500,000, maybe up to 6 of this 8 million was accounted for during this budgetary process. And that was, pretty well talked about at the finance committee meeting and town council and school committee and at town meeting. So, but there's still a lot of money to be had, and a lot of other moving parts there that maybe we don't have to use ARPA funds for that, but we could. Next slide, please. So what can ARPA funds be used for? Again, it's up to us to make sure we comply with a very strict allowable uses. So ARPA funds, they really break it into some big buckets. Public health spending, okay? That seems to make a lot of sense, whether it's ongoing direct COVID cost, whether it's maybe mental health issues that are by COVID, due to COVID or what have you. Economic impacts of the public health emergency. I think this is a big catch-all, particularly when you're looking at segments of population that are disproportionately affected by it, whether it be certain industries or certain ethnic groups that are hurt more statistically under COVID and actually under COVID. We can have some help here. Lost public sector revenue, and I racked my brains. Kevin Gill and I did on this one, as did members of the FinCom, and I would love to have said, and town council members, we should be able to put $1 million of this right into lost revenue because of what happened. And if I could have said, hey, we lost $500,000 in hotel taxes, that's an easy thing, right? I can look what I got in hotel taxes before the pandemic, what we received during it. You compare those two and you say, hey, there was certainly a loss in that area. We should get money for that. Well, no, because the federal government was very clear. You're looking at the total revenue picture of the town. And because the total revenue picture of the town was okay, actually better than okay, we thought, there really isn't anything to look at there. Premium pay for essential workers is another one that could be looked at. Infrastructure, another big ticket item to look at. Maybe we're talking about walkability, connectivity of neighborhoods to parks and to businesses, streetscapes, things like that. One thing we cannot do, we cannot replenish reserves or fund pension funds. And that's probably one of the clearest items in the whole OPER guidelines, is that you can't use it for that. Next slide, please. So to break this down a little bit, infrastructure, including roads and open spaces. Love to see us discuss those as a community. Modernization of cybersecurity. And when you think of all of the meetings and the learning and the remote work that's being done on Zoom and over the internet, more so than ever before, that's a big issue. We couldn't have things hacked. Health services, and we've been talking with the Board of Health about this, Catherine Dinger and Anthony Choi. There are some serious health issues that have been exacerbated because of COVID. Depression, things like that, anxiety, things that we need to look at as a community, and maybe we need to have more social work and things like that. This is the time to talk and to think about that. School or educational services, that's something we certainly have talked about, and Doug talked about that a lot. Police, fire, and other public safety issues. We are all continuing to look at those and what that means. Water, good quality water. Luckily, we have very good quality water here in Wakefield, but that's something that ARPA funds looks at because that's not everywhere in the country. Assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits, and I think that's something that we will also be looking at, because there are some businesses that and nonprofits and households for that matter that really barely made it through the pandemic. I think we're going to see a lot of that in the next 6 months as some of the federal programs, direct programs run out. And maybe part of this is helping households get back on their feet with rental assistance could be. Maybe part of this is helping small businesses do better digital marketing, help them with things like that. And also nonprofits that, think about the nonprofit events that they may have had for fundraisers, frankly, almost non-existent other than virtual. So there might be some things we'll look at there. Next slide, please. To give you some examples, this is guidance that's from the federal government. Assistance could include support to enhance outdoor spaces for COVID-19 mitigation, restaurant patios to improve the built environment in the neighborhoods, facade improvements, things we've talked about this. Maybe we have an ability to do this. Investments in parks, public plazas, and other outdoor recreation spaces. May be responsible for the needs of disproportionately impaired communities by promoting healthier living environments and outdoor recreation and socialization. Is there some better walking paths we can do through this? Because what did people do during the beginning of the pandemic? We all did, right? What was the only thing we could do? We could run and walk. And you saw people walking all over in different routes, not always the best ones. And maybe that's something we can look at. So these are some things that are coming down the pike. There'll be lots of discussions about this. We are not in a rush. We don't have to spend it by next month or lose it. and that would be a mistake. I talked with my managers all around me, and we're all looking to, increase community input, of course, board input, and then see where this takes us and what we want to do. And we'll be talking to our departments to see what they see out there, particularly the school and the health department, things like that. Next slide, please. So very quickly, we have town meeting coming up on November 6th. And you'll have my very pithy town report there. Use of free cash to balance the budget, vocational school that Dan talked about, public safety building, Broadway crossing, some upgrades there, particularly to help with the quad gates, and a better connectivity there for that neighborhood, particularly in sidewalks and redoing that, and library contract and library hours. And I will say that on the town side, municipal side, going to fiscal year 23, we do have one bargaining unit that is up. And we're going to start that process in December of this year. So we should be hopefully ready for town meeting. We're lucky there. What I'd like to do now, if it's okay, Madam Chair, Chair Smith-Galvin, is maybe turn it back to you. And I think if there's any board members that would like to say a few words or had any questions or comments, we certainly could open it up to that. And then if there's any members of the public, we could do, but I'd turn it back to the chair and we can to get back to the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to everyone. I'm always amazed by the amount of time and work that goes into this presentation. And it reminds me that we have a lot of work coming up in the next few months going into the Springtown meeting. I can't actually see who has their hands up, so I will
I can help
defer.
you, Madam Chair. Doug Butler has his hand up. It's probably been up for the whole time. So if we
Mr.
could-
Butler, please ask your
Mr.
question.
Butler, speak.
He's joining.
Can you hear us, Ryan? So maybe while we're waiting for Doug, maybe we can get two people queued up at once if there's more people who have interest.
Yeah, nobody has their hand raised, Julie.
Oh,
Oh, here he comes.
here comes Doug.
Yeah.
Doug, can you hear us? There he is. We can see you now.
Oh, goody. All right.
How you doing?
Just Steve and Dan, can you remind me what, and maybe it's Susie as well. I just don't remember when we talked about the 600 of the 8 million or so and change that you used in ARPA funds. What do you use that for? And how is that not going to be a recurring item going forward? Like, are we going to diminish this over the next 4 years by taking 600 grand from whatever you did in May or June and then utilizing it every year? So like, have we already sort of spent 2.5, or have we only spent 6?
I'll jump in for the town side, and then Doug, I'm sure, can jump in. Doug Lyons can jump in for the school side. On the town side, we expanded the greeters at Town Hall. We expanded the clinicians' hours at the police department, all in anticipation of federal funds on that. My position on that will be, this year we thought we'd put it under the ARPA funds. I think the positions that we would keep long-term and maybe expand them, I would look to work them into our budget going forward, with how I would look at that on our side. And maybe that's a couple $100,000 or less.
Okay.
Doug, if you're referring to the FTEs that I referred to on slide 20 that were COVID-related positions, is that what you're?
I'm not sure. Steve brought up the fact that you used 600 grand of the money so far. I don't know how it went.
It was about 400.
Ooh, okay, keeps going down.
Yeah, I mean, those funds, we had anticipated that we would need, when we presented our budget, the number was 360,000. That number has gone up to 480,000, and those are 1-year positions. And the plan is if we need to keep those positions on, that we would collaborate with the school committee and FinCom and the town to think about how we might do that through grant funding first before we would make them part of the regular budget. But that's kind of where we're at right now, Doug.
Yeah, but by grant funding, do you mean different from ARPA, or do you mean utilizing the ARPA funding?
It could be ARPA, Doug. A portion of it, I'm imagining, is going to come from ARPA in terms of the 360. But
Yeah, I guess that's where I get uncomfortable with the whole thing. Is we're talking about, this $8 million is not an enormous amount of money for all like the needs and wants of wishes of the town, and I'd rather that not get embedded with like things that are not nice to have. So you should have them if you need those bodies, but then we should just budget for them and spend that, like allocate the money versus utilize. I hate using sort of one-time money for, lifetime jobs.
right. I think we're on the same page, Doug. I think we're talking the same talk.
Okay.
I think what I'm saying is I think we're in agreement in regard to philosophy, right? But our regular budget that we have, all of those dollars are accounted for. So the only other monies that we have are COVID related resources at this point in time.
Doug Lyons, exactly what are those 4 positions for the 360? Aren't they 2 nurses? And can you just remember what exactly? Because I think Doug Butler, it would be clearer to you, like they are positions that we only foresee needing in kind of a COVID world, and that they're not like we got another math teacher or we got another kindergarten teacher, right? Their roles kind of specific to the things that we need because of COVID. Now, could those needs continue? Possibly, but we're looking at this as short-term needs specific to COVID is what those funds were being used, not to staff positions that we think for the long term we would need. But Doug Lyons, can you just weigh in on exactly what those positions were?
It's not easy addressing the Dougs. There aren't many.
No,
of
it
us,
is not.
right? No. No. So I think Susie, I think we're talking the same talk, right? And so, and Doug Butler, if you're nothing else, you're remarkably consistent, right? In your approach and in your questioning about budgeting in terms of expectation and philosophy. So I think we've done this long enough with you to understand what the question's going to be. And so we do believe and we agree that if something is needed, it has to become part of the regular budget. And we need to make a case for that. And we need to do it thoughtfully. And it's not a nice to have, it's a need to have.
Okay, great. No, and Doug, this wasn't that. This was more just thinking about how we're thinking of this globally, not any sort of attacking, not even attacking, but you understand. I'm not
No, I
not critical of the spending. And by the way, if we need to have it next year, then we're probably going to need to have it forever. So, that's, I guess, where I stand on this whole thing. It's like, you get 3 years. After 3 years, you're pretty much locked in.
It's like the SAFE grant, Doug.
Yeah, sure. The chief's not on the call. I think that's it for me. I can go back to being a non-panelist or a whatever.
Let's see.
Ed is coming on now.
Okay.
Great.
Yep.
Counselor Dombrowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for all the work that you put into this presentation tonight. I think it's incredibly helpful for our town to be seeing this, and not just where we are currently, but where we're forecasted out to be going forward. So thank you. That's really helpful. My questions actually relate to the school spending, and perhaps Superintendent Lyons, I am being consistent because I've asked similar things in years past. I just want to remind everyone that all in, when you think about the school budget that you presented, plus adding benefits, plus adding the retirement component, we're talking about close to 2/3 of our entire town budget goes to schools. And I know that recently another ranking came out of school systems, this one by US News and World Report. And it seems like every time a ranking comes out from whatever source, be it Boston Magazine, be it whatever the source may be, Wakefield presents as underperforming against a number of other school districts. So I compared some of the data that was there to see. I'm like, all right, well, how is our spend comparing to other communities? Winchester, which was incredibly impressive in where they ranked, spends about $14,540 per student per year. Our spend is $15,774. So our spend per student is actually higher than theirs. We're higher than Melrose, which is only about $12,500. We're higher than Reading, which is at about $14,002. Linfield is slightly above us, but that's the only one. And then I was looking at, all right, well, where do we fall in terms of our proficiencies with reading and math, which are the two measures there? You know, Winchester is 82% at or above proficiency to our 63%. Math, they're at 79% to our 57%. This is at the elementary level. And then I looked at our school rankings. You know, out of 964 elementary schools, only 2 of our schools are even in the top 1/2. You know, that's 50 percentile. The Walton School under this ranking is the bottom third, and Woodville is nearly the bottom third. And this is every public school in Massachusetts. So we're talking about public schools, you know, in the mix that are in receivership right now. We're talking about public schools that are underperforming, public schools that aren't being well funded. And so I'm looking at the numbers. I'm like, all right, Wakefield, we're definitely, the spend is there. But when you look at these numbers versus a number of the others, it's concerning. And then we look at the Galvin. The Galvin was ranked 319 out of 491. And when you put that in perspective, it's, you know, to Winchester, Linfield, and Reading, I mean, those were, you know, number 15, number 25, number 33. We're number 319. And I think it was most striking to me that the 2 buildings or the 2 facilities that we have spent the most money on, the Galvin, obviously, with the new construction, and the Walton with a significant renovation that we just completed the last couple of years, actually are some of the worst ranked, you know, of our schools. And so I guess my question is, I have incredible respect for all the work that's being done within our school department, with our school committee. But, you know, the idea that we're spending, you know, making this level of investment, you know, in our students, in our staff, in our teachers, and these are the sorts of numbers that we're seeing. You know, I feel like our children's expectations should be higher relative to where we fall. I feel like our parents' expectations should be higher relative to where we're falling. And I feel like the taxpayers especially their expectations should be higher based upon the spend. I don't feel, and having, you know, served on FinCom, I know we don't cut corners with the school budget. You know, I know you guys are efficient with what you do, but you also are very well funded. So I don't think it's a question of not enough, you know, resources being directed. And in fact, you know, again, the per student resources that we direct versus other communities that are scoring better than us are more. You know, we have more per pupil. So I guess my question is, you know, how can we finally write this so that every time someone from Wakefield looks at a ranking, and I understand that we're not driven solely by rankings, but let's face it, you know, rankings, you know, are indicative, and consistently we're not falling where we expect or think we should be falling on any of these, from, you know, regardless of what metrics we use. So what are we going to be able to do differently going forward so that we have, you know, more confidence in where we're landing, you know, as a community, and hopefully having the quality of instruction reflected in the rankings, you know, when they get issued the next time around.
Yeah, it feels like about 8 questions in one there, Ed. I have not seen the data that you're referring to, so it's hard to respond to all of the statement in its entirety. If your question is money in, money out, should we be higher based on the money that we're investing? Is that your question?
I guess that's more of a comment that I think the expectation is we should be. And so I guess the question is, what is it that we're doing? Because, this ranking in particular, focused on reading and math proficiency for elementary school, for example. That's a pretty reasonable measure, I think. Again, I'm not an educator, but I would assume that that's a pretty reasonable measure. We don't seem to stack up against a lot of our competition, although our spend seems to be higher than it. So I'm trying to figure out how we can address that in a meaningful way so that going forward, we land better position to a lot of other communities, because it impacts our property taxes and our values, because people want to come to a community where they feel like the school are solid. And I feel like anyone from the inside or outside looking at these rankings, they're not. I don't think these instill confidence in the quality of instruction in Wakefield Public Schools, but I think in a lot of ways it is there. But I'm trying to understand why there's such a disconnect.
Yeah, again, and when we look at other districts, we often use the DART tool at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed when we're doing a kind of a data comparison. So I'm curious why you selected Winchester to compare us to. Do you think that we are most like them in regard to our kind of demographic and our student investment?
Well, I think demographically we are actually fairly comparable to Winchester in a lot of respects. But Winchester stuck out to me because they have consistently underspent us per pupil and have consistently shown themselves to be much, much higher ranked on any number of these, of these lists. And again, this was, a pretty objective looking at reading, looking at math, looking at a number of other factors, and demographically, I don't think we're all that distinct from Winchester. So that's what stands out. But Reading as well, the spend is less, and the ranking seems to be better than ours.
Yeah, I would be happy to take a look at that and kind of answer your question in print. I feel like I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage, and trying to answer a question about comparative references that I haven't seen yet. I'm also curious, is the U.S. News and World Report information based on the spring MCAS information?
It's based on it looked at pre-pandemic specifically, so as to not have the pandemic influence, how the numbers would look. So perhaps I believe the school committee would have seen it, or if not, I would encourage the school committee to review it, because I do think it's important. And again, I'm not saying that our decision making as a community should be driven by a ranking or a listing, but this has been as long as I've been involved, going back to FinCom days, this has been a consistent issue that I've observed again and again, and it always our community always presents as underperforming as compared with comparable communities, but our spend is there, and so I want to understand the disconnect.
It's interesting because U.S. News and World Report reached out to us about a pre-COVID and asked if we would write a response to an online response to the improvement that has been made. So again, I'm curious to look at the data to see, because from where I sat, I thought, and from the correspondence that we had from U.S. News and World Report, I thought our ranking was increasing. Again, I think ranking is a relative thing, and I think that those rankings are designed to. It's like Boston Magazine or anything else. They're designed to sell print media, and so. But I think objectively, you ask a really important question, which is, what are we getting for our money? And I would be happy to have that conversation. I just would feel like I would need some more. An opportunity to look at that data so that I could answer you more succinctly.
Just to be clear, it's to me less about that, but making sure that our students are getting, the most they can get for the money that's being invested in them, because that's really what it comes down to more than anything, certainly first and foremost. So I would just encourage Chair Veyer to look into this, and as a school committee, I think it's an important analysis to do, certainly as a part of your broader discussions about the direction going forward.
Yeah, Ed, I'm glad you brought it up. I had seen that kind of come through Facebook feed and didn't get back to it. Things have been kind of crazy with the school committee and a lot going on. I have done some research on the rankings in the past and found that kind of the categories of things that they look at tend to, they look at graduation rates, they look at number of AP classes taken. And so it would be, I think to Doug's point, we need to look at what their ranking criteria was and understand. I don't think that Wakefield looks like Winchester demographically. So I think getting a point of view on what that looks like and what that means. But some of the other communities that you did talk about, Reading and Melrose, like I think we should be looking at what that looks like. What is the criteria, but not get wrapped around the axle on the actual rankings, but understand the criteria and where could we do better. So Doug and I can absolutely take a look at that together and get back to you. But neither of us were kind of prepared to kind of speak to that particular report, but we can take a look at it.
I appreciate that. Thank you both.
If I could jump in, there was I guess a follow-up question on this, if that's okay, Madam Chair.
Sure.
It's from Doug Butler, and he used the question and answer showing how he is great on technology. Is there a huge correlation between parental wealth and education and test scores? Very open-ended, I guess. My guess is probably the answer is there is a pretty big correlation. So I'll leave it to the educators. Even though I'm bred by an educator, I'll say there's probably a correlation. Doug, get off mute. Back me up, Doug Lyons. He doesn't want to.
The answer is absolutely. Socioeconomics, and when you correlate the achievement gap in the United States to socioeconomics, one of the greatest predictors for academic achievement is income, of course. Yes.
Okay. And I think Councilor Santos has a follow-up question as well.
And not to get into a debate on this, but just as someone who's been in higher ed for 23 years, rankings rankings come and go. And the Boston Magazine, certainly those rankings, I don't think I've ever taken them seriously. And I've lived in this town my whole life. I don't think we are like Winchester. Winchester's a lovely community, but we've never been like Winchester. But the rankings that I read there made no sense. From someone who has dipped her hands in rankings and has dealt with it at the higher ed level, take a look at them, Doug and Susie, but with a bit of a grain of salt. And I appreciate what Ed's saying, but I don't think those rankings spoke to what Wakefield's done. Makes no sense that Walton was the 4th elementary school in certain, I just don't know what they counted. And at my own institution, we fought with rankings. It's a game sometimes. So I just want people that listen to the presentation of evidence to not think that we are the bottom of the barrel. One ranking by the Boston Magazine is not indicative clearly of where we are from a substance point. Can we improve? Absolutely. But I just would be careful following that evidence and how they count. That's all I wanted to say. But as a member of the council, also thank you all. It was the level of information delivered was really wonderful, and I know we've all worked really hard to make sure that our town is going in the right direction. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I don't think we have any more questions that I can see.
No more.
No more?
No.
Okay, so does that bring us then to, I guess other new business would have been questions.
Yeah.
Speak now or forever hold your peace. But well, actually you don't have to hold your peace because there are going to be lots of discussions around budgets, school and all of them. And so I really do encourage the community to take some time to understand what is in our budgets. We have a pretty good tool on our website to help understand budgets and then engage in the process in areas that interest you. And school's obviously a big one, but there are lots of areas in town. And we really only talked about annual budgets. There's capital budgets and other things as well. So I guess with that then,
Hey, Julie, before you close, I just wanted to also say thank you to everybody for kind of the preparation and the delivery of this. I always find this this presentation really informative and giving the big picture to the community of what is coming in from a revenue standpoint, what we're spending, so that we can have perspective on what our revenues look like. And I think we were all really worried last year when we gave this presentation of what the future was going to look like. And it's great to see that it looks brighter than expected. But for me, I always feel like this is a great way to get kind of prepared as we enter the budget season to really all have an understanding of what the starting point is. I can't even imagine what it was like before you guys didn't do this meeting because it's such an important way to like level set everybody. And I know I was a part, I believe, of the first meeting that took place. So just a thank you to all of you that put work into this. There were other I think all of the school committee members were on the call tonight. So thank you for joining us, school committee members, to listen in. And I do look forward to kind of how this process plays out and being a part of the process as we get our budget together for the next fiscal year. So I just wanted to say that thank you before you close the meeting, Julie.
Thanks. And thanks for pointing that out. We're on a webinar format, but there were 23 other members of the school committee and the town council and the finance committee who were fully participating, just not on camera today. So thank you to them. Jim, did you want to give any closing remarks?
No, only to say that, we in finance committee, the 15 members will be, working on the numbers behind the scenes with and for folks, and working with Steve and others. It's a good board. We like to collaborate with the schools and with the other departments, and we do enjoy getting into it line by line, and we look forward to the fall and into the spring. So thank you for participating.
Great, thank you. All right, so I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for being here, and we look forward to working with you as we go into the next budget season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.